you, Danny. And I'm super excited to have Tara Lynne here with us, and I can't wait to hear her segment of this. And I'll let her introduce herself when we get to that segment. Tara, you can tell people a little bit more about you as your intro to that. But thanks everybody for joining us again this month for our June webinar. And so let's kick it off with what our agenda is going to be. Okay, so we're through the first. I'm going to give an update on what's happening with my bees. We've kind of been tracking with that through the season, and just tell you where I am. A part of that will be an update on sourwood honey production, and folks have watched that over the years with my farm, and I've publicized that on socials and things like that. And there's a lot of folks in North Carolina who kind of track with this. So anyway, I want to give an update on that here, and then say where are we in our season. I know we're all at different points in times, but there are some commonalities that that we share, and some decision points that you have right now in your season. So just want to give you some things to think about there. And then Tara Lynne, we're going to talk about plants and pollinators and things to plant and other things to do with the plants. Again, super excited about that. And then Max is going to tell us about this very new thing, very fresh, that we're going to be launching here. And then we'll answer your questions. So let's go to the update. So as you may remember, if you don't remember, I'm really relaunching my bee operation here at my farm. I'm sitting on the porch right here, and in Creston, North Carolina, in the northwest corner of North Carolina. And anybody kind of on the East Coast right now, we're in the middle of a pretty good heat wave this week, and it's no exception here. But my heat wave is different than Tara Lynne's heat wave, given that I'm in the mountains. But anyway, so we're right in the middle, of summertime, and heat is pretty normal. My current hive count is 45-ish. Again, you never know exactly the count because you've got things that go queenless and swarm and things like that. But my hives right now are a mix of production hives, meaning that I'm expecting to make honey with these. Another group are in what I call backyard beehive locations. This is a model that I started in really 2008, so a good while ago. This model that a lot of folks use today for placing hives in locations, and I've been doing that for a long time. And so several of my hives are placed in those. And then I have the dink category of hives. If you have any number of hives, you always end up with what we call dinks, or a way that you can call them dinks, that they're just not doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're in some state of disarray. And so you try to figure out what to do with those. The other thing I'm doing here is I'm enjoying some of the fruit. I have blueberries right over my back shoulder here that, both the honeybees and all the native pollinators, the bumbles especially, really are on those in the early spring, and they are getting ripe right now. And I have them on my granola in the morning, so enjoying that. Black raspberries as well, and then the blackberries themselves down the mountain, as I say, they'll be coming in pretty soon. Close to July 4th is what I remember. Probably down where you are, Tara Lynne. And then I've also been busy planting, and this coincides well with Tara Lynne's speaking on planting for pollinators. I've got a project I'm working on with NC State where I planted some big swaths of pollinator-friendly plants. So that's what's going on here. Let's see what else. Oh, okay. So this is a very recent picture. I've shown you pictures before. This is the area that was flooded last fall. This was all covered in 8 feet of water. But this is what it is right now. And the right in the center is where the bees are. In the back and to the left is you can see a chestnut tree blooming right now. That's one of the things that's happening. To the right is where they were cleaning up the creek. Big machinery in here was cleaning up the debris in the creek and all that. But very full of life here. Lots of sunflowers and zinnias and dahlias and garlic and sweet corn and the pollinator patches. So everything's coming back to life here, including the bees. So what's next? Oh, okay. So here on the left-hand side, I don't know if you see the bee sculptures on top
Mhm.
of the hives. Okay, so this is one of my backyard beehive location. It's sort of a backyard beehive, but sort of a pollination. To the right of this is a gigantic blueberry patch. I mean, I hesitate to call it a patch because I don't know, it's multiple acres. And so this is one of the places where I have these bees. This is just the other day. You can see they're pretty full and hot as well. On the right-hand side, this is from just a few days ago. This is hives in Sourwood, and so these hives have been moved from my farm to the Sourwood locations. Um, I still do it the hard way on the back of a truck by hand, and that's my son in the picture. Thankfully, he's helping me out with that. So all right. So again, the hives from my house, most of them have been relocated to these backyard beehive locations or the sourwood production yards. The ones that are left at home are dinks or ones that were sort of okay, and if they stay here, they're actually going to make basswood. So it's cool for them to be here as well. So on the sourwood side, I gave a talk last summer at the North Carolina State Conference, kind of just on sourwood honey production and what is needed, the elements for producing sourwood. It's no different than producing any other kind of honey. It's just happens to be in the context of sourwood. You need bees, okay, good strong hives. You need a bloom with nectar, and then you need some weather to cooperate. So at this point in the sourwood season, we're on the very front end, and I can honestly say that in the history of producing sourwood, the elements have never lined up as well as they are. I hesitate to say this because I'll jinx it, or in beekeeping, you can never count on anything. But regardless, I'm going to do it and say that things look good right now. The bees are in place. Actually, most of the bees, my bees are kind of quasi strong because, again, they're all starting fresh right now from this season. And I know that if you're a beginner beekeeper, they tell you don't expect to take honey the first year, but I'm a great counterexample to that because I do that regularly in the fact that I can take a hive in fact, some of these are packages, and take it from package to production in the same year and be okay with it. But again, you have to have some management and know how to do that to do it well. So that's probably what's missing. But in any case, yeah, so things look good. So go to the next picture, Danny. I'll show you a couple of things. So in the center, that's a sourwood tree. Picture was taken, I don't know, yesterday or day before. And at the base of these little fingers is where the blooms start, and then they progress out to the end of the spike. And so when those first bells start blooming, that's when the that's when the bloom begins and when the nectar begins. And so as it progresses, it gets stronger and stronger till, and it's in the middle. That's kind of that peak flow, and then when it gets to the end, it tails off again. So, and on the left here, these are some hives. This is the day after the trailer was put into the sourwood yard, and those bees are fascinating. You know it, but I mean, they find the pollen like instantly. They were pouring in. You can see the pollen hopefully on their legs there. And on the right hand side, this is a trailer. This is not mine. This is a buddy of mine, a beekeeping buddy that is sharing the yard. My few little hives are behind the trailer that are going to make sourwood here. But anyway, everything's in place and looks really good. And the last 2 or 3 days, the scales themselves. So if you go to the next slide, I think it's a scale, perhaps. Yeah, so this was from
Oh,
Saturday. Um, and if you're not familiar with hive scales, the little sawtooth, that's a day. Okay. So each of these are days. I mean, you can see the date on the bottom, but if you just look at the sawtooth, that's your typical sawtooth, and picture of what a scale looks like. And on the right hand end, this one you can see at the end. This is late in the day. It's peaking up higher than the day before, and that's when we see that we can say that the sourwood has started. It just kind of goes a few days before. It's just going to be steady, and then all of a sudden it's going to go up a little bit and go up a little bit more and go, and then once it's up, it just goes vertical. Um, Probably next week if we don't get too many thunderstorms. And the only fly in the ointment right now is the heat. How much is too much heat? I don't know. I'm hoping this is not too much, but we'll find out. If it gets too hot, then the bees spend too much time keeping the house cool. Uh, and so they kind of shift some of their energy to that, but we're hopeful that that's not going to be the case. But oh, one interesting thing on this, sorry, before you go, Danny, see the little spikes in the middle there on some of those? Those are thunderstorms. When a thunderstorm comes through, they all come back and it spikes up. And then when the sun comes out, they all leave again. And so you get these little spikes in the graph, which is really cool. Except it's not cool because I don't like thunderstorms coming through in the middle of the day for sourwood in particular. All right. So what is happening right now and what's doing? Well, we just passed the summer solstice, right? And for the beekeeping universe, winter solstice is always an epic turn. The queen after winter solstice, you can tell she's like ready to prep. She's pressing into longer days, good weather, op, you know, doing more and more, trying to hit that spring flow and summer flows. Summer solstice, guess what is happening now with the hives? They're like, oh, winter's coming. I'm sitting here in a heat wave, but minds are already turning and critters are already turning to winter and what's coming. And so that's kind of where we're at this turning point of the season. But in the bee world, there's still some activity, a good chunk of activity left in the more southern U.S., like outside the mountains, like again where Tara Lynne is. You're kind of in this summer milieu of if there's something around for them to work, they'll work it. But generally, they're just kind of sitting there doing their thing, not really super active, just trying to survive and go day by day, right? Unless you're next to agriculture or some water swamp or something that's giving some extra nectar source. Now, in the mountainous areas, again, we're going to have sourwood. We're also going to have basswood as well, right here where I'm sitting. And that's more of a northern nectar producer as well. Probably our friends in New York, they'll get the basswood and upper Midwest as well. That's a pretty big one there, I think. And then northern U.S. and Canada, they're just kind of just now coming into full-on honey production time. Okay, and that's where a lot of the commercial bees have landed now after all the pollination in the spring. They're in the North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana area, and our friends in Saskatchewan are, the producers there are waiting on the big canola flows and other things like that. I think they might even get some borage up there, Tara Lynne, in some places. And so the big bulk of the honey production season is happening there right now. So with this new change in the season, the summer solstice, it's really a change in population dynamics is beginning in the hives. You're kind of at peak population right now, and that has some implications for other things like Varroa, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But you as the beekeeper, some of the things you need to be noticing now is, what is the population? You can't expect it. It's not going to keep going up. At this point, it's going to plateau and start going down. So it's even more important than ever to record those frame counts, the things that we've tried to encourage you to learn how to do, and just to estimate how many frames of bees you have and record that in HiveTracks. And you'll be able to just see, that progression. And the other thing you can do this time of year, and again, depending on what your goals are, you can even split now, make some nukes, some summer nukes, that then you can overwinter even as a nuke, or maybe you want to requeen. You're still in a good time of year for doing that. So again, there's a lot of options that you can do right now. If you're not in one of the honey production areas, or even if you are, like these dinks that I have, I'll probably try to requeen or split them, just get them into a more healthy configuration so that they can kind of revive and produce something, for next year. All right. One more slide on what's happening. So I devoted a whole slide here to so this population dynamic, right? So your population goes growing through the spring, and the last bullet here is your homework assignment. I like to give you homework assignments, right? So go look at Randy Oliver's mite population model. Okay, you've probably seen slides in presentations about population dynamics of mites versus bees. We're at one of those points as the bee population starts coming down. All that growth in your bees during the spring fueled the varroa mite population growth, and so it's going up. Bees are going down. That means an increase in load per bee. That's the problem with the varroa mites, or a problem with the varroa mites, is that imbalance between the bees being able to handle that load. So right now is the time, if you haven't turned your attention to doing something about mites or managing them in some way, or if you're a treatment person, to treat them. As I say, treatment, it's a tricky time of year. Again, we're in a heat wave right now. It limits your options on what you can do. I'm thankful I live in the mountains, and so some of my favorite ways are formic for varroa treatment, which is really sensitive to heat, but it's an option for me where I am. Not right now, but it will be once the heat wave breaks. So if you're unsure of that, consult with your local beekeepers. What do they use? Also look at the Honeybee Health Coalition. They have fantastic, I've mentioned this before. I can't mention it too many times. But Honeybee Health Coalition has really good tools. They have a Varroa decision tool for what's the current conditions and what mite treatments are okay in those conditions, as well as a whole guide to Varroa and how to manage it as well. So I encourage you to go avail yourself of those resources. And again, talk to your local beekeepers. What are they doing? Um, for probably 6 or 8 years, I participated in the Bee Informed Partnerships Sentinel Apiary program, and I was part of creating Bee Informed Partnership and that program, but I participated in it as well as a beekeeper, and we took samples every month of bees, sent them to the lab in Beltsville to actually at University of Maryland to be analyzed, varroa counts, nosema, things like that. And typically they would reflect kind of that population model that Randy Oliver, has. One exception is sometimes your big booming colonies in the spring, the ones that don't swarm, that you've not split, that you've managed to get through, and maybe they're a big honey producer, their mite loads can spike pretty early, even in June. So you'll want to be on top of those. I've had examples where I had some, and we were in this sampling program that spiked up, and you needed to do something about it at that point. So again, pay attention to Varroa right now. Have some game plan for what you're going to do about it. All right. And so we're going to transition now to Tara Lynne, but before we get there, I want to give you a couple of reminders. So within the HiveTracks app, you can submit pictures, you can document flora, document pollinators, but before you get there, you have to take pictures, right? And so you should totally have your phone with its camera with you at all times, taking pictures of what's blooming, no matter where you are. I just take pictures and then I'll get them into the HiveTracks, but get into a routine of just documenting the things that you see. It's kind of fun. Which leads into what Max is going to tell you about as well later, right? And it just helps you as a beekeeper to tune in, which we as beekeepers, to be a good beekeeper, we're not just tuned into the bees. We're tuned into the ecosystem around the bees and what's happening. And we know it's all connected together. I mean, our bees, the native pollinators, what's blooming, and us. Any Douglas Adams fans out there? Uh, the interconnectedness of everything is a okay. Here's another homework assignment. Go read Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency book. It's really good. And the way he solves crimes is this principle. Everything's connected together. Everything influences everything else, right? And that's, as beekeepers, we need to be aware of that. So one of the ways that we can help ourselves is to just be aware of what's blooming, take pictures, and submit it into HiveTracks, because then we have it recorded and we're going to do really cool stuff with that. So with that, let's go to Tara Lynne.
Great.
And introduce yourself. Give us a.
Of course, yes. So before we jump to the next slide, I just wanted to kind of give a little lay of the land. And I actually like to start with a quote that was a beautiful segue, James, from John Muir. And I paraphrase, but John Muir is known for a quote where he had said, "You can't take one thing out of the universe without finding that it's hitched to everything else." Because it is, really important to have a whole systems mindset if you are growing, just if you're just focused on your garden, but also, as a beekeeper, or if you're planning to become a beekeeper, looking at how everything is impacted. And it's interesting, and in talking to non-beekeepers, like my husband as well, like trying to get him into that mindset of, well, if he does one thing in the yard, I'm like, well, then that's going to have a whole cascading effect elsewhere. Like he likes to mow really, really short. And I'm like, no, put it on the highest setting. We need to cover as much soil as possible. And it's like a long time education piece there. So what I'll be chatting about today, and I'll share a little bit about myself in a moment, is utilizing the space that you have to create abundance without having to increase your garden space, add more containers, just doing what you can with what you have and maximizing that. So we can jump to the next slide. And a little bit about me. I started beekeeping in 2017. So that picture there was my neighbor coming over during my first hive inspection and taking a picture with my first hive. I have 16 colonies today, and all but one descended from that queen in that colony. My one that's not right now is a swarm that I caught in the mountains about a month ago. So that I confirmed did not come from my hive. So I have some different genetics that have come in. I have two apiaries. I'm based in Pittsboro, North Carolina, and I have another apiary in Robbinsville. And most folks don't know where that is in Western North Carolina. So that is west of Asheville, near Bryson City. So between those, kind of back and forth, managing those colonies, I have a flock of layer chickens and also some quail. And last year I raised our first pigs. And also our first meat birds too. And I grow in all types of growing spaces. I've got a bunch of grow bags and, smaller containers, on the deck. And then I've got various levels of raised bed sizes, also more of like a hugelkultur mounds around, which is in permaculture practice, which we'll touch on a little bit. And I've got a regular in-ground garden. I've got a high tunnel. So really seeing what these different environments, how the challenges and the benefits of each of them. So I can kind of give a little bit of insight about those too. I have a background, pretty much all things content. I started my career as a public relations director, and I have been a writer for pretty much that whole time for the past 20 years. I work in corporate America by day, and then I've got my beekeeping and my writing work outside of that. My degree is in film and cinema, which is, very much not really related, but it's a lot of, I feel like, visual work with the work that I do and really seeing how things come together. So I feel like my degree kind of helps out in that way. I recently got a leadership certificate from MIT this spring, and my permaculture design certificate is from Oregon State University. So I had absolutely no interest in gardening and plants, and whenever anyone would talk about them, I would totally glaze over and have, no interest in what they were talking about. And once I got bees, I was then very curious about what can I plant for them. And I really like to optimize my time. So I wanted to make sure what I was planting would benefit them in many ways, but also have like multiple benefits for, the ecosystem and also something that, we could benefit from as well. So before we jump to the next slide, some other things I wanted to kind of plant in your mind about different purposes that plants can support is that they can be wildlife habitats, so they can provide space for different insects and animals to raise their young. You might have a goal of creating a really private space, so you can, site certain plants to create a privacy screen. So that might be your main purpose that you're looking for. You might just be looking to create a sanctuary and have something that's really pleasing to the eye and a place of respite. And you might also maybe, I don't, we almost primarily heat our home through firewood. So like having, a fuel source from, the plants and trees that you're growing and, prioritizing certain trees. That might be something that is important to you so that you've got a high nectar producer, but over time you could replace them and cut them down and use them for firewood. My neighbor is a master craftsman woodworker, and she is always doing things in the woods, finding different trees that she can use for her woodworking. So there's benefits for different species out there as well. And what we can talk about next with the first plant is utilizing some plants that can have some Varroa benefits. So sunflowers are a really powerful plant. In the world of permaculture, there's about a dozen different principles, and one of them is to really produce no waste and that to use everything as a resource. And sunflowers are, I feel like, the shining star because they don't have any waste about them. As I've got noted here, they are fantastic with a really deep tap root to help aerate the soil. And they go really far down and they can remove a lot of toxins from soil. So perhaps you just acquired some land and you're not really sure what the previous landowner's growing practices are or were. That might be a nice crop to do and just, get that earth really fresh and pull out whatever toxins may be present. For being in such a small space, if you consider the amount of, not even really square footage that a sunflower will take up with their stem and just their bloom, they produce so much forage for pollinators. So, if you've got a few containers on a porch, a sunflower or two doesn't take up much space and can produce a lot in that small space. Or if you are, rotating some plants through your garden and there's a section where you're maybe not going to be growing anything for a bit in the summer, you can throw some sunflower seeds in. I haven't grown them before, but there's like the mammoth sunflower variety, which produce really tremendous heads of seed. And you can grill them and eat them just like, corn in the summer. And they're supposed to be really good and taste very similar to corn when you cook them that way. But if you're like me, you don't really get out there in time for even the smaller heads to try it out, and the birds will get to enjoy it. So it's also, a great source of food for the wildlife in that way. And, if they fall, then if there's any other ground critters around, then they can get those too. I generally will, at the end of the season, cut them back and I'll move their stalks off to the side, and the little pile of their stalks can serve as some habitat for overwintering pollinators. And then in the spring, I can use them to make little like bean pole teepees and things. So there's no need to like buy any bamboo or use any other kind of trellising because it's kind of already produced its own trellis itself to be reused. And some of the things that I suggest looking for, because there are so many different types of sunflowers, There are some that are really ideal for cut flower production, and those generally don't produce any pollen because a lot of florists will use them because they know they're going to be in someone's home or at an event. So if your goal is to provide forage for pollinators, then that would not be an ideal sunflower to plant. So just make sure you're sourcing seeds for a variety that actually produces pollen. And then the other thing that I personally like to look for is a multi-headed sunflower. So between all the varieties out there, some will only produce one flower and then they're done. And others will produce a dozen or more. Usually this time of the year, mine haven't started to bloom yet, but like in the summer, if I do these presentations, I've got, a few that are already, I can count 12 or more blooms on them. So just having one seed, one growing space, they don't cast a ton of shadow. So like if you're just randomly putting them in your growing space, it can produce a lot in a really small area. And some of the promising research that I was reading, and I think at least it's cut off on my screen. I don't know if it's just my Zoom, but about a 2.75 fold increase in mite count drops for bees that have been foraging on sunflower forage. So it's a really big impact when you've got like a high density of that forage available for hives. And so if you are thinking of, okay, let's try a bunch of different approaches to managing Varroa, which I think there was research out of Penn State University that says that's the most effective is like using a bunch of different approaches rather than just following one path. So coming at it from all these different angles and giving them the health and nutrition they need can be another way of helping to manage that. And of course, the sunflowers are really pretty. So if you want to just cut a few and you don't have to feel as bad taking some for your kitchen table if you know you've got these multi-headed sunflowers out there. We can jump to the next slide. All right, so another one, and I tried to use a bunch of plants that aren't not particularly native to certain regions because I know we've got a wide variety of folks from across the country. And a lot of folks can, when they hear of buckwheat and they hear of bees, they immediately think of buckwheat honey and how, healthful it is. And buckwheat itself is one of, I feel like, the most powerful little tools you could have in your garden space. From seed to bloom, it's a 40-day process. So if you're past your frost, or even you can, get them in the ground right before your last frost, then they can start thriving and you've got all these great nectar sources. They also don't take up much room, so you can interplant them around your, your growing space that you generally, any of your perennials. They will die back as soon as the frost hits. But they are also really great at aerating the soil, pulling nutrients up to the surface so that your neighboring plants can benefit from it. Here in the South, and of course, for anyone experiencing big heat waves around the country, growing any kind of like lettuce greens and salad greens in the summer is almost impossible unless you've got like shade cover and different things. But the greens on buckwheat are edible. So if you're growing a little patch, you could just selectively take a few leaves from different plants and you can add them to pasta and get that extra benefit out of it as well. And of course, if you grow them to grain, so after all the bees have enjoyed their nectar, and they produce a grain, you can hull them and if I've got like a little countertop mill, so you can mill them yourself and cook them up too. The other thing that I like about it, because it's this 40-day bloom cycle, is that, as I'm like succession planting in the vegetable garden, if I'm taking something out, I always like to have something else in its place. And so when I'm out there already, like either transplanting or direct sowing, I can just keep a pack of buckwheat with me and interplant those around. So it's not any extra work for me rather than just carrying an extra little packet of seeds. And that makes it possible here where my primary apiary is to have some nectar sources during a time of dearth, which is what we're, pretty much in right now here. And they're very popular. But one thing I want to mention about them before we jump to the next plant, and I've had my beekeeping mentor had mentioned this to me a while ago. I think he was growing, there's a few different varieties of buckwheat. I grow a white, and there's two different pink ones, and then I think there's some others, but I've got these three different kinds. And he's like, I don't see any of my bees on them at all. And I had read that, at certain times of the day, plants change their nectar flow. So I was like, try to go out there at another time. And then sure enough, he went at a different time of the day and the bees were all over it. And I think one of the questions that had come in that Danny, that you had shared was, about like foraging cycles and times. So if you're checking your plants and you're like, no one's using them, it might be that you're looking at your plants at the same time every day, which they might have a better nectar flow at a different plant at that time. So we can jump to the next one. Yes, so bee balm. This is another one where you've got so many different bee balms to choose from. This particular one is the Scarlet bee balm, and I feel like it's such a great plant for so many different pollinators. I feel like I can't even count how many varieties I see across all the plants that are blooming right now. So. Of course, teas, that's one of my favorite ways to use them, and especially in the summer, like doing some iced teas and some infusions. Getting the flowers and the leaves and infusing them in vinegar. You can make some great salad dressings with it. I love doing that. And if you like to make mocktails and your own like herbal cocktails, I've infused them in a an apple cider vinegar, and then added honey so you can make your own shrubs with those. So I've got little recipes about that if you were curious. And you can cut the leaves and just add them to salads for some extra flavor because they do have a bit of an oregano type of flavor. So if you're making some tomato sauce and stuff and you don't have enough oregano around, you could put this in as a substitute, and they dry really well, so they make a great potpourri, or you could make bath teas out of them. And it has a bunch of medicinal qualities too that because it's native to our region, indigenous peoples have used too. So we can jump to the next one. And James had mentioned borage earlier, and I know this is something he's excited about growing more of as well. So there are a few different varieties of borage too. So this particular one has like this blue purple iridescent flower, which is really, really beautiful. And there's a white borage as well. And I grow both kinds. I personally like you can eat the young leaves on the borage and like put them in salads. I don't really care for them. I feel like they just very quickly become a little too hairy and coarse. But if you get them young enough, they might be tender enough. But the nice thing with borage is it's a really, really powerful companion plant. And the flowers itself, they replenish their nectar every 15 seconds. So if you're thinking of like having a good quality source that, the bees can keep coming back to, this would be a really nice choice to add. When planting with tomatoes, they help attract beneficial insects and to repel the ones that can damage the tomatoes. And back in the day, borage flowers were a very sought after ingredient for candy factories. So they have a fairly sweet nectar, and they're really nice to just drop on if you're doing some homemade ice cream this summer. Just throw some borage flowers on there, throw them in lemonade and different drinks. If you are into making little mocktails and stuff, it's like a nice little addition. But they don't take up too much space. They also have a really huge taproot. I think they can go down to like 12 feet or something, almost like sunflowers and comfrey and other plants with these big taproots. So they're pulling up a lot of nutrients that other plants with shallow roots are going to miss out on. And because of that, if you are going to grow these in containers, they will, if they've got some good flow with like getting the water out and it's not going to be standing, they will grow and they'll produce a lot of blooms, but their roots are not very happy. So like I've got a few deeper grow bags and they do well in those, but if you're going to try it in a little pot, you might be a little disappointed because they do need that big space for their root area. And you can jump to the next one. All right. So I feel like in the US, rapeseed really isn't a common term around, but we all know what canola oil is and the canola plant. But rapeseed and canola are the same thing. So, Canada's got a huge production of canola, and with this production comes a lot of great forage for bees. So as you can kind of see here, canola doesn't require any pollination, but there are studies that show that when there are bees placed with canola fields, that the production of canola oil and the plants they thrive a lot more. So there is a benefit with that. There were a few local farms in the area in the past few years that started selling some of the greens, and similar to like the buckwheat greens, like you can use them like spinach. So just throw them in your pasta or in your stir fries and just, have that extra benefit of, the fiber and the greens and the vitamins from the greens in there. And if you are trying to grow any corn or grains that are really heavy nitrogen feeders in your growing space, then canola rapeseed is a really good interim crop to have in there. So to keep your soil alive, and it will help replenish the nitrogen so that whatever you're growing next, it'll be a little bit easier for like if you're going to grow beans after, it'll be easier for that nitrogen to get acclimated into the soil and, help kind of balance what you might have taken out in there too. And because of its really long bloom time, the Honeybee Health Coalition cites canola as being a really great source of both nectar and pollen to give all those benefits for the honeybee nutrition. And I also see, so yes, I saw a note in the chat about the canola production. So yes, I personally, like I meant to have a little footnote about that as well. So like commercial canola production is generally very high pesticide and a lot of chemical production in there. And just the creation of the canola oil is also a very highly processed ingredient. And depending on how it's sourced and how it's produced, there are some studies that show it's very inflammatory, but then there are certain producers who have methods where they're able to preserve the benefits of canola. So there are some that show there are some, health benefits. So it's almost like, that whole John Muir quote, you can't really pick out one thing. It's kind of all connected to everything else in that sense. So I think we're up to the last, yeah. So if you're curious about learning more, so as Danny and James mentioned, my honey farm is 5acreshoneyfarm.com. I also run a Substack, so you've got that information there. And I'm fairly active on Instagram. If you're looking for a professional connection, I'm on LinkedIn. And also my email and YouTube channel information is there. And for folks that are based in North Carolina, I will be presenting about natural beekeeping at the state conference in Flat Rock next month, the second week of July. So I might see you there, but I'll pass this back over so we can jump into Q&A.
Oh, thank you so much, Tara Lynne. That was awesome. I think we all learned a lot from that. Okay, maybe before we do the Q&A, Max, you can share this with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Tara Lynne, thank you so much. And I remember when we first met and I first saw you speak, and it was over a year ago. I knew that there was some exciting and interesting things that we could do together as we together work toward increasing the health of bee populations through different means and different ways. And I think that the most interesting thing, and it's something that, usually the questions that you receive are, what should I be growing? And usually your question back was, well, where are you and what are your goals?
Yeah.
And that was something that sparked sort of like, where are you and what are your goals? It sparked a lot of conversations within HiveTracks, because that's obviously something that we deal a lot with. It's like, where am I and what are the goals that I have? And some of that has to do that to understand where I am, I need to get an idea of like where a baseline of the different plants and pollinators that I currently have in my garden. So I need to sort of like, to go anywhere, you need to understand where you're at. And that is something that we focused heavily on in the last months to make it easier in the app to get an understanding around where I am, what is the inventory of plants and pollinators that I currently have, how many of which do I have, to then get to the next point, which is something that we're going to do more of next year, is to see, okay, based on what I have right here, what are the recommendations that I could possibly implement? And what are things that, when we work with experts like Tara Lynne locally for the given area, based on the goals that I have for my garden or my flowering patch, what could I do? So to get us started with this, we are launching an exciting biodiversity challenge. So it is a challenge that is going to be going for 2 weeks. The sign up is going to start this week. It's a link that is tied to your HiveTracks account. So again, it's the free mobile app. So there's no entry barrier other than you have to be. I'm very sorry about our Canadian friends right here. You have to be a resident of the US for the first round. We promise that we will do another challenge later this year, and we will have a more global coverage for that. But this is the first trial run. So you literally sign up with your normal email address. To join the challenge that is tied to your HiveTracks account. And then any biodiversity records you will record in the app between July 1st and July 14th automatically count toward this challenge. There's a bunch of interesting prices, from cash prices to getting access to HiveTracks Pro for free. So there's a bunch of different ones for the person collecting the most images of plants and pollinators. And then, of course, we have some very interesting. We hope to be able to invite you again, Tara Lynne, to look at some of the results of this challenge to understand sort of what are the profiles of the gardens of people or parks that people submit, to understand what the best recommendations can be in specific areas based on the goals to implement interesting things. So let's go to the next slide. I'm just going to be very quick here, so we leave a little bit of information for our Q&A. So what all you need to do in the app is to create a flowering site, right? So it's next to an apiary. That's how you create a flowering patch, which is basically, it functions exactly the same way as an apiary does. It is almost like a place without hives, right? So it's a flowering site, it's a flowering garden. Click on the same button, the button at the bottom there. And then when you create a record, you will see that there are 4 different options. There is a document flora, a document pollinator, a pollinator count, and a flora abundance. So there's 4 different measurements that you can take to enter the challenge. You have to create 2 pollinator counts and 2 flora abundance bits and pieces. So with those 2, you enter the challenge, and then it is how many document flora and how many document pollinator items you will have. There will be a public leaderboard that just shows your first name and the initial of the last name and your state. So it's quite easy to participate. And then we will run that for 2 weeks until July 14th. And we have some very exciting updates that will be coming out after that to show what it can tell you in terms of information for your own garden, and what you can do with just having a really good understanding of what blooms and what flies in your own garden. So I'm going to leave it at that. We will send out the emails this week and let everybody know. And then we start officially on July 1st. And we look forward to having you all participate and then having a nice follow-up webinar to show with some real-world data what some good recommendations could be to implement flowering patches and a more beneficial environment to pollinators, both native and managed. And with that, back to you, Danny, and let's look at some questions and answers.
Awesome. Let's do it. We'll also send out in the email your code if, as I mentioned at the top of the webinar, if you want to give HiveTracks Pro a go, now is a perfect opportunity to do so. So I'll include that link in the follow-up email as well. But if you want to go ahead and sign up beforehand, your promo code for 40% off is June 40, but you'll receive it in an email as well. I know we're short on time, so maybe we can pop through some of the Q&As. I think James has done a fantastic job of keeping the chat answered. So maybe there's one or two questions from here. Tara, you want to jump in from the pre-submitted questions before we
Yeah,
close?
let Tara, you go for the planting ones. Go for it.
Yeah, the planting ones. Okay, so one that stood out to me was about the best honeybee friendly plants in the Pacific Northwest. So Oregon State University has an extension service site. So if you Google that, or actually I could probably just drop it in the chat right now. That is a great resource to see what is great in your particular region. And by season, they have everything really detailed over there. And what I also saw here, there was one that was about how far away from the bee yard should a garden be for optimal effect. So that's a really interesting question about, like the distance, because bees are known not to like just jump out of the hive 3 feet and forage right there, like they go out and about. So having it in a distance where it would be in their flight path, where they're going to be able to see it as they're wayfinding. But if you are trying to increase traffic or to at least let them know that it's there, I think it was Tom Seeley or it might have been someone else, but they have a study that shows like if you just put a chair or some type of visual structure, like I liked on James on you have those bee sculptures on your hive. So like that makes
Yeah.
it so much easier for bees to find their way around. And they know like, oh, I'll just go where that chair is. And they tell their hive and go to the chair and and so they'll find it. So it may not be as, making sure you're not planting like within a few feet of your hive, but wherever your planting space is, like to put some type of visual cues to make it easier for those aerial travelers to come in. And should I grab another one or should I pass it over?
Yes. No, grab.
Okay.
There's
So
a
the white clover and pink clover question about like how bees go to one or the other. So kind of like what I mentioned before about like certain plants will run their nectar at certain times of the day. So that could be that you are not observing that plant for the entire daytime cycle to see when the bees go there. And if there are certain nectar sources that are open, like all of the sourwood that James talked about earlier, bees will abandon everything else and just go there. So that could be impacting what they're going for. And as far as like which clover provides more nectar, that might be a good ChatGPT question to find out that answer. I don't know the answer to that one, but I can pass it back over.
Well, they're asking about mountain mint. What's your opinion on
mountain
mountain?
mint.
Oh, mountain mint.
Yeah, because it is a bit. I've seen it a lot. Yeah.
And what was the question about it? I saw, but
What's your opinion on mountain mint
Yeah.
oh,
as a
yeah,
nectar producer?
yeah, I'm not familiar with like the volume
Okay.
in comparison to another, but I always see it's very well traveled when by
Right.
many different pollinators, and
Yeah.
it's good tea as well.
We have a lot of farms here in the Boone area that use mountain mint, and like Against the Grain is one of them, and it's a very popular spot for pollinators.
Yeah, and it's a nice perennial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, so Paula from Georgia said that she has mountain mint blooming right now, and the bees are all over it. Yeah, and then Matt also has a few patches of mountain mint. That's definitely a good option.
All right, Danny, I think you'll need to wrap it up.
I think we are at time. Unfortunately, there's so much more to get through, but hopefully
Yeah.
we'll have another follow-up session, or at the very least, some social content. So be sure to follow Tara Lynne as she shared her social channels, which we will also do via the HiveTracks at HiveTracks on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. So we'll share some more content on there and hopefully get through a couple more of the questions. As Max said, we'll send out an email as well to everyone here with this recording, so you can go back and refer to all of the really valuable insights and tips from Tara Lynne today, and James as well as the Biodiversity Challenge. So lots happening. But thank you so much for joining, everyone. It was great to see everyone. And thank you again so much, Tara Lynne, for being our guest speaker today, and James as well.
Thanks for the
Yeah, thank you,
opportunity.
everybody. Yeah,
Have a lovely rest of
fantastic.
your days. Bye,
Have a
everyone.
great summer. Thank you. Bye bye.